We'll be living in this house, our family. Be grateful, okay? Looking down on me, my mother-in-law said this with a smile. What an unreasonable person. After all, this house belongs to my mother. Despite my mother having just passed away from illness, my unrelated mother-in-law was cheerfully discussing redecorating the house, which was irritating. She showed up unexpectedly, without even offering condolences, let alone waiting for the funeral. Instead, ignoring my tear-streaked face, she happily talked about living there with my husband. It seems, in my mother-in-law's view, the family consists only of my husband, and I'm treated as an outsider. She dismissively waved her hand at me as if shooing away an insect. You should be happy we're willing to live here as a family. You didn't really think an unrelated daughter-in-law would be considered family, did you? My name is Jennifer, and I'm 30 years old. I have an older brother I deeply respect, 5 years my senior. We've always been close, and he's always been there to advise me. When I was in elementary school and struggling with friendships, he would go to those friends and humbly ask them to get along with me because I was having a hard time. A bit meddlesome, but a very reliable brother who cares about his sister. During my teenage years, while my brother often clashed with our parents during his rebellious phase, he was always kind to me. He was a constant, dependable presence who would help me out whenever I needed it. No matter what the adults around say, I'll always stand by you, Jennifer. I was even envious of him for a time, for being able to say such embarrassing things openly. When our father passed away from cancer during my college years, my once wild brother reflected, I've been really looked after by my parents and teachers. It was Dad and my teachers who always got angry thinking about my well-being. I wasn't used to my brother talking about the past, so I was a bit surprised, and just like my parents, I developed admiration for teachers. That experience sparked my desire to help children grow and assist those who are struggling, leading me to pursue a career in teaching. While others were focused on job hunting, I dedicated myself to studying for the teacher recruitment exam. I still remember my brother's surprised face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother. Congratulations! Who would have thought Jennifer would become a teacher? Keep it up! He said, offering his support. Although I became the teacher I aspired to be, reality was not as sweet as I had imagined. Chasing after daily lesson preparations and student guidance, overtime became a daily occurrence. Amid the spread of remote work, there was no such option for teachers, who had to commute on packed trains every day. I often had to work on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays due to extracurricular activities. Upon becoming a working adult, I started living alone and realized the difficulty of managing everything by herself. I remember how physically and mentally tough my first year of working was. Yet, within all this, I found a sense of fulfillment in my teaching job. As I grew accustomed to the busy life of teaching, I began to notice something off about my mother's words and actions. Conversations over the phone were sometimes unclear, and my mother would forget things they had just discussed. Worried, I visited her home to find it cluttered with garbage. Despite my mother being quite tidy, she seemed confused about why things had gotten to this point, claiming she forgot to take out the trash or that she thought she had cleaned up. After consulting with my brother, they decided to take their mother to the hospital, where the diagnosis we received was shocking. She was diagnosed with dementia. The doctor mentioned it was the onset of mild dementia, which seemed to have started manifesting more since my father passed away and my mother began talking less. The situation with my mother led me to frequently contact my brother and visit my family home more often. After visiting home, I would sometimes discuss future plans with my brother. I was introduced to Keith by a friend during a time when I was busy with both work and home responsibilities. Lacking the leisure to enjoy personal time, I was grateful when a friend suggested I needed a break and took me out for drinks, where I met Keith. Keith worked for a multinational company. As a French teacher with a strong interest in overseas matters, I found Keith's connections with international work fascinating. He was sincere and always prioritized my well-being. Amidst my busy schedule, the time spent with Keith brought my immense happiness. Even just going out for a meal when we had time would re-energize her. Gradually, I became more attracted to Keith, and after 2 years of dating, he reserved a private room in a very nice restaurant for them. I wondered why he was giving me a ring on an ordinary day, and then he handed it to me. "I want to make you happy, Jennifer. Please marry me," Keith said, leaving me speechless for a moment because of my mother's situation. I knew caregiving would become more challenging in the future. I had talked to Keith about my mother, but I didn't want to involve him in my personal issues. Yet, Keith reassured me, "If you're hesitating because of your mom, it's okay. I want to support her together with you, Jennifer." His words brought me to tears, and I struggled to simply say yes. At 27, I married Keith. I had discussed it with him beforehand, and after talking it over with my brother, given my mother's condition, we decided to build a duplex for us to live with her as a family. Around this time, my mother-in-law started contacting me frequently. Before our marriage, our interactions were minimal, just formal greetings and meetings. She seemed uninterested in me back then. I suspected she had a motive for suddenly reaching out so often. Sure enough, her calls were about the new house we were building. "I heard you're building a new house. What's the floor plan like? I'm curious about the house my son will live in. Can you show it to me?" she asked, then started dictating. "A larger kitchen would be better, wouldn't it? The stairs should be here, not there. Let's have a sunroom next to the living room on the first floor. Underfloor heating is a must, it gets quite cold in this area." I was uncomfortable with my mother-in-law, who wasn't even going to live with us, meddling in our plans. To avoid conflicts, I casually brushed her off while having Keith intervene, but she persistently contacted me directly. Feeling uneasy about her motives, I consulted with Keith. "Your mom seems to be acting as if she's going to live with us. It's making me anxious. Even when I try to talk through you, she keeps reaching out to me directly. I'm struggling to handle her lately." "Yeah, there seems to be something behind it. From now on, I'll handle anything that comes up. Jennifer, just ignore my mom's messages. Won't she think badly of me for ignoring her? It's clearly her who's being unreasonable, so don't worry. I'll talk to her again, but knowing her, she might still try to contact you. If that happens, feel free to ignore her calls too." With Keith's support, I began to ignore my mother-in-law's messages. We finalized the layout of our home and started the construction. By the time we planned to move into the new house 6 months later, the contact from my mother-in-law had almost ceased. Keith had informed her about the completion date, but there seemed to be no particular reaction from her. Finally, after 6 months, our home was completed. The first floor included a living room, kitchen, and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor had our common space and 2 bedrooms. However, by the time the house was finished, my mother's condition had gradually worsened. Since we both worked during the day, we couldn't be with my mother, leading to the house often getting significantly dirty. We were told by doctors that taking away her remaining capabilities could cause a rapid decline in her condition, so we let her manage her personal care during the day. However, she gradually began to struggle with tasks she used to do. She could cook, but would leave the frying pan on the stove indefinitely. She would either forget to add detergent to the laundry or use 3 times the necessary amount, creating excessive suds. She would insist the newspaper hadn't arrived that day, despite it being right in front of her, and remained upset about it until the evening. The list of these small yet significant issues caused by her illness was endless, tormenting us both. After discussing with my brother, we decided to enroll her in a day service during the weekdays. Initially confused by the unfamiliar setting, my mother's mood brightened as she found companions to converse with, and she began sharing her activities like origami and attending shows at the local community center with me when I got home from work. Just when we thought we had adapted to this new routine and her condition had stabilized, it didn't last long. Only 2 years later, what seemed like an off-season cold turned into pneumonia, and she never recovered, passed away. The effort of just living day to day had been draining for my mother with dementia, and there were times she couldn't even eat the food given to her, weakening her physical and immune strength. The suddenness of it all left me in constant tears, unable to regain my composure. Yet, there was no pause in the tasks that needed attention, contacting the city office, informing relatives, and arranging the funeral. Amid these preparations, my mother-in-law arrived with a load of belongings, seemingly prepared to stay. My mother-in-law, looking very much like she was staying the night, thought I was there to help with the funeral and said, "Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to help my mother. Please come in." But as soon as my mother-in-law entered the house, she said something I never expected to hear. "I'll be living here." Frozen in shock, I was speechless as she continued, "If you don't like it, you can leave. I'll live here with Keith." Ignoring my confusion, she proceeded without any condolences, excitedly claiming, "I've waited 2 years. Finally, I can live here. Did you make it as I requested while inspecting the place?" It then dawned on me why my mother-in-law had started contacting me frequently before we built the house. She had always intended to live in the house we built, likely expecting me to comply more than Keith with her preferences in its design. Is that why she contacted me repeatedly, to try to make the floor plan more to her liking, and because she thought I would follow those instructions better than Keith? Keith must have informed her of my mother's passing, prompting her immediate visit. Keith, pale-faced, interrupted, saying, "Mom, don't you know? Didn't I tell you? This house wasn't in my name, it was Jennifer's mother's." "What? And now that she's passed, the inheritance goes to Jennifer's brother. What are you talking about? Explain." My mother-in-law glared at me, saying, "Normally, the husband would be the homeowner, right? Keith earns more than you, and with your salary, you couldn't possibly afford this house's mortgage. You were relying on Keith's income to make the payments. It's practically Keith's house." What an unreasonable daughter-in-law and her mother. "Right, Keith?" Keith tried to explain as his mother looked to him for support. "No, Mom, well, you see." I interrupted Keith. "Let me explain, Keith." My mother-in-law turned her glare back to me and aggressively asked, "What are you going to explain?" "The mortgage for this house has been paid by my brother and me. My share comes from my own earnings, and we've never used Keith's income," I stated. "Keith, is that true?" "Yes, that's right." I continued. "When we built this house, we decided it would eventually be passed on to my brother. Now that my mother has passed away, it will be inhabited by my brother and his wife, along with her parents," I explained carefully. My mother-in-law, mouth agape at first, became visibly upset. "I won't allow it. It's normal for a daughter-in-law to live with her mother-in-law after taking care of her own parents. I've been waiting for this moment. This is outrageous. I know a lawyer. I'll consult with them about renouncing the inheritance." Of course, we had no intention of doing that, but my mother-in-law was in a frenzy. "The brother will be here soon, so let's discuss this again when he arrives." "Fine. I'll speak directly to your brother and make him renounce it. I'm not one to hold back my words. My opinion won't change even after he arrives." My mother-in-law then stayed in the living room until my brother arrived. Keith, looking puzzled, kept apologizing to me. "It's okay. She seems unsatisfied with just my explanation, so we can talk again when my brother gets here." In the meantime, my mother-in-law seemed to be contacting her lawyer friend about the inheritance renouncement. "Regarding the inheritance issue, yes, I believe the person will agree. Thank you, we'll prepare the documents once things are more settled," she said over the phone, smiling repeatedly. An hour later, we heard a car stop outside. My brother had arrived. "Mom, my brother is here." Eagerly, my mother-in-law stood up, declaring, "I will make Keith transfer the house to me. Then I will live here," and headed toward the living room door. Just then, the door opened, and my brother walked in. My mother-in-law, ready to shout, inhaled sharply but suddenly couldn't speak. Her eyes wide open, and she collapsed to the floor. My brother, due to his appearance, can seem quite intimidating, often mistaken for someone involved in underground activities. He's a big, muscular guy who surfs regularly and works outdoors, leading to his suntanned skin and sun-bleached hair, which he keeps in a buzz cut for convenience. He was tall, muscular, and bulky. Moreover, he had a noticeable scar on his forehead from stitches. The scar on his forehead from a childhood fall adds to his tough look, making it seem like a blade injury to those who don't know him. Seeing my brother, my mother-in-law lost her composure and just sat down on the spot. "Is it you who wanted to say something about this house?" My brother glared at my mother-in-law, asking politely. No, I thought this house would be mine after your mother passed away. But I just heard that the brother will live here, and I didn't know anything." "Did Jennifer tell you to live here?" "We thoroughly discussed what to do with this house before building it, so I find that hard to believe," my brother said, intensifying his tone. "No. I must have misunderstood. Since I was involved in the house planning with Jennifer, I thought I had the right to live here," my mother-in-law said, obviously struggling, looking down. "The right to live here? So, did you provide any assistance to my sister?" "No, not like that. So, without bearing any cost or making any promises, just because you shared your opinions on the layout, you thought you had the right to live here?" "Yes. I'm sorry. It was my misunderstanding." Initially skeptical, my brother responded to my mother-in-law's outlandish claims with dismay. However, to her, it seemed like my brother was not just puzzled, but angry. As she kept apologizing, appearing unusually meek. "I don't recall any discussion about sister and brother-in-law living with their mother after our mother's passing." "Right, Jennifer? Of course. I never detailed to her about this house, just that it was for living with our mother." As I answered my brother's question, my mother-in-law covered her face with both hands in shock. "I thought this house was in Keith's name. I believed that after a daughter-in-law cares for her mother, she should live with her mother-in-law next. I waited until your mother passed away because living while caring for a confused old woman is hard. I thought it was my turn after hearing of your mother's death from my son, so I even gave up my apartment. I have nowhere to go now. All I can say is that it was thoughtless to act without any promise. Anyway, once my sister and brother-in-law move out, my wife and I will live here. I'm sorry, but we have no intention of living with a stranger who lacks common sense, so please leave." Though trying to seem submissive, my mother-in-law's disdain for our mother was evident. My brother, being formally related as my mother-in-law, restrained from shouting but gradually became angrier, his voice low and cold. As my mother-in-law looked at us pleadingly, we reiterated our intention to leave. "Actually, we are moving abroad soon due to Keith's job." "That's right. Mom, you know I work for a multinational company, right? I did mention that we might move abroad eventually. We knew we would eventually go abroad, so my brother and I agreed to care for our mother here until then. Keith also agreed it was best. Sadly, since mother has passed, we'll stick to our original plan and let my brother and his wife live here. So, what now?" Looking at the dejected mother-in-law, Keith and I exchanged glances before I sighed and spoke up. "If you've given up your apartment and have nowhere to go, shall we take you abroad with us?" I extended the invitation knowing she would refuse. "You know I'm afraid of flying, right? I don't even have a passport." "But if you have no place to live, we need to find somewhere." Keith expressed concern. Either way, applying for a passport now would take time, and arranging to live abroad won't be quick enough. We'll be leaving the country soon, so it's impossible anyway. My mother-in-law's previously assertive demeanor had faded, leaving her looking disheartened. Seeing this, Keith suggested, "I'll try contacting Tawny." "Wait, no need to call him. I can't live with Tawny," she insisted. Tawny is Keith's younger brother. Despite her eagerness to live in our house, she adamantly refused to live with his brother Tawny. "But you have nowhere to live, so what choice do you have?" Unable to argue back, my mother-in-law looked down, then suddenly looked up and demanded, "Then, just give me some money. I absolutely refuse to live with that daughter-in-law." Watching my mother-in-law scream, Keith sighed in exasperation and started to make a call. She attempted to snatch the phone, screeching, but as soon as the call connected, she backed off. Apparently, Tawny's wife was coming to pick her up. Deciding to let Tawny's family handle it from there, my brother and I quickly proceeded with the funeral preparations and other necessary communications. After finishing our conversation, returning to the living room, we found my mother-in-law sitting quietly in a chair, evidently dreading the thought of going to Tawny's place. We were about to prepare for the funeral, right? There seems to be some time left, so let's start preparing while we wait. Heath suggested, and my brother and I agreed, checking what was needed together. An hour later, the doorbell rang. "Hello, anyone here?" Opening the door, we were greeted by Tawny's wife, who had a distinct gal appearance from a past trend, dressed flamboyantly. Even on this day, she wore a top that was deeply cut from the collarbone to the chest. She's the type of person who speaks her mind clearly. Despite her flashy appearance, she is straightforward, dislikes illogical things, and is quite amiable, which made me think she'd get along well with my brother. My mother-in-law seemed to have a strong aversion to Tawny's wife. "I am so sorry for your loss. I was in a hurry, so excuse me for looking like this." She greeted politely, and I was a little out of sorts. However, her demeanor changed as soon as she saw my mother-in-law in the living room. "Come on, Grandma, enough is enough. Don't bother your son and daughter-in-law anymore. Let's go home now," she said, prompting my mother-in-law to stand up. I've been suggesting from the start that she live with us, but she just had to be stubborn. There's nothing harder than old people's pride. Anyway, I'll be taking her back with me. Sorry for the intrusion, Tawny's wife said and smiled before leaving with my mother-in-law like a storm. Tawny and his wife have been offering to live with Mom for a while. Despite her looks, his wife is very caring, and she promised to take good care of her since they're married. But Mom kept refusing because she didn't want to live with a daughter-in-law like that, choosing to live alone instead. She's quite a character, Heath, chuckling, explained. Deep down, she's a good person, and with Tawny being responsible, I think she'll manage to live properly. As he predicted, my mother-in-law ended up living peacefully with Tawny and his wife. But she can't get away with doing whatever she pleases anymore, so she seems to have calmed down. It's probably for the best. Despite her complaints, she seems to have no intention of working and living on her own, Heath said with an amused sigh. The house we built is now inhabited by my brother and his family, just as planned. Recently, my sister-in-law's parents also moved in, making it a multi-generational household. As agreed, they're continuing to pay off the home loan. Meanwhile, I'm living in London, Keith's overseas posting location. Leveraging my experience as a French teacher back home, I've become a teacher at an international language school here. Unlike before, my work hours aren't as long, and I always get weekends off, giving Keith and me more time together. This new environment provides daily stimulation and allows for a fulfilling life with more leisure.